K-12 Social Studies Coordinator, and I'm also the Vice President of the Mass Council for the Social Studies. So welcome, and I just want to say first and foremost, thank you for joining us on this early on a Sunday morning. We are the first thing of NERC, virtual NERC, which is exciting. So kicking the whole thing off. And then after Gorman assigned this session time, I didn't know whether I should change it to either Bagels and Bay State or Coffee and Commonwealth, but here we are. So I will just share for you again the link to the website that we will be using in a little bit here. And also I emailed to registered participants a link to both the slide deck here that we're going to look at today and also the website that I just posted. But if you didn't get those or you need them later, feel free to shoot me an email. It's at the end of the presentation, but it's rpowers@plymouth.k12.ma.us, a very long email. Also, I apologize if you hear weird noises. So doing this from home, that's exciting, Sunday morning. We just got a puppy, a golden retriever, and I just heard this a minute ago, but we're trying to teach him maybe not to bite us all the time. So if you hear, that's my wife down there yelling ouch in a very dramatic fashion to try to scare the dog into not biting us. It's not going well, but we're going to keep at it. So anyways, so thank you all so much for attending this workshop. This workshop is essentially, in a nutshell, about that stack of books you got mailed to your school, and what it is and what you can do with it. So today what I'm going to do is take you through kind of the story of the Massachusetts Chronicles, this resource that we now have as part of the Plymouth 400 project, educational project, and what this resource is and what it can do for you and your students in your school. And then I'll take you a little bit through the Educator guide that goes with it, that I had the pleasure of developing with a series of educators here in the Plymouth Public Schools, that gives you some practical activities and ideas for kindergarten all the way through grade 12 with the book. And then we'll talk about a professional learning opportunity that Bridgewater State, one of our partners, has provided for educators who are using the resource. And then I'll open it up to any questions you have. And depending on the timing, we might take a look at strategies as well that you can use to even adapt this to remote and hybrid situations, because that's a thing now, as we all know. Elaine has asked if the session will be recorded. The session will be recorded. So that's super helpful. So you can pass this along to colleagues and access it yourself after. And Jay, thank you for the well wishes. The 5-month-old German Shepherd probably pays a lot more attention to you than our golden retriever. But so if we could actually, what would it be a Zoom workshop if we didn't do some sort of introduction in the chat? So if you could just take a second and just introduce yourselves in the chat, who you are, who you represent today, and maybe like a favorite topic or event or person from Massachusetts history. So once again, I'm Rob Powers from Plymouth Public Schools, and I think lately my favorite topic that we're going to look at later on is Frank James's speech in 1970, which kicked off the National Day of Mourning holiday, commemoration rather. So awesome. So we have Lowell represented. Good morning, Elaine. Brian, good morning, North Andover High School. Christine from Braintree. Oh, 3rd grade. We have so much for you in this resource. So exciting. We have Ruben from Desi. Good morning, Ruben. Ruben's been extremely busy coming off of one conference and rolling into this, so that's great. Gorman is with us. Kathy, who's big shoes I am trying to fill here in Plymouth, now the executive director of MCSS. Stories of Two Cultures. We work with that a lot in Plymouth for sure. So this is great. I'm really excited to have you all here. Jay's here from Lincoln Public Schools at Hanscom Middle. So why don't we talk a little bit about what this resource actually is and the project itself. So as you know, it's the 400th commemoration anniversary of the arrival of the Pilgrims to Plymouth, Massachusetts, which a lot of folks see as the beginning of our Commonwealth as we know it. as you can imagine, that 400th commemoration has not gone quite as we expected, like everything else in the world this year. But one of the things that's really exciting about this project is it is probably the only project of Plymouth 400 that has been able to endure the way that it was anticipated, for the most part, given everything that's happened. So I'm so grateful and fortunate that the folks at Plymouth 400 have been supportive of this from start to finish, and we've been able to work together and think through how we can make sure that this still becomes a resource that you can use this fall and moving forward in your classroom. So the Massachusetts Chronicles is the educational component of the Plymouth 400. It's the educational legacy is what they're calling it, of the Plymouth 400 commemoration. And what it is it is a student-centered book that details the history of the place known as Massachusetts from earliest times to present, as it's framed in the book itself. So the book goes back 5,000 years. The history of the Wampanoag people is where we begin the story in this book, and it takes us all the way up to the Plymouth 400 commemoration in 2020. And along the way, we have two real main features of this book. So the first feature is a 60 newspaper style articles written as if you were reading a newspaper the day after each of these events happened. So it starts with our Wampanoag correspondence with the Wampanoag way of life before the arrival of European colonizers, and takes us all the way, like I said, up to the Plymouth 400 celebration. The text level, as you see when you explore the book, is geared towards upper elementary. We wanted to make this accessible, particularly to grade 3, grade 5, and grade 8, given the curriculum in those 3 grades, and knowing that we're always looking for resources, right, especially in grade 3 and grade 5. But honestly, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, with scaffolding and really thinking through this and the context of your classroom and your learners, this could be used at pretty much every grade K through 12. So it has these newspaper style articles, and we'll take a look at those in a few moments. And then what's really fun and cool about it is that it has a 100 event timeline of Massachusetts history using 6 themes. So we'll explore that as well in a few moments. But it's a cool approach to teaching state and local history that, quite frankly, I haven't seen before. I think we've all seen cool timelines. We've all seen, like historical fiction. We've all seen, nonfiction written in an interesting way. But to combine all these things into one resource, I think is really neat. And then there's also kind of an almanac element to this book as well. So there's a Massachusetts honor roll of famous people from Massachusetts history. There's a listing of historic places and also additional facts about the state in the book as well. So all of this is packed into this book. Like I said, it's written for upper elementary, middle school, but it's totally applicable in grades K through 12. And then down here, you'll see a picture of the book itself. And then so the class sets that everybody got, this is basically how this worked. We were developing this book, and in the process of that, I have to say that Michelle Pecoraro, Plymouth 400, the executive director, and Gary Maestas, the now recently, as of a week ago, retired superintendent at Plymouth Public Schools, they are really good at bringing together folks to work on a project. So we ended up connecting with Bridgewater State University, and through Bridgewater State University, got to know Bruce and Patricia Bartlett, who are local benefactors to Bridgewater State University and very much committed to civic education. And using the resources, the distribution resources of Bridgewater, and the financial resources generously donated by Bruce and Patricia Bartlett, we were able to put a class set, so 32 books, an educator guide, and a massive 12-foot fold-out version of the timeline in every school, every public school in Massachusetts. So that is this mysterious box that has arrived at your school. And what seems to be happening, from what I'm hearing from my friends across the Commonwealth, is that they're getting this box and the principal's like, hey, is this history? Like, is this social studies? Who does this go to? So if you didn't get that box, go ask in the front office, ask your principal, hey, anybody get this like weird box from Plymouth 400 or Bridgewater State University full of books, and find that, because it's so exciting that it's pretty much like it's thousands of schools that got these resources. So really, really cool opportunity there. So you will get in that box, like I said, in that shipment, 32 books, a class set to start. the Educator guide in hard copy, and then one of those fold-out maps. And then later on, I'll have a link available to you too if you want to purchase more for your schools. It was shipped out at the end of August, so I believe they arrived about the first week of September in most schools. Now, this is the thing. We know that it's super challenging when things are, we'll say, we won't call it unsolicited, because a notification was sent out through the Superintendent's Association to all the superintendents. But when something's quasi-solicited, we know how that goes sometimes in school districts. So certainly see if you can poke around and find that. But what we did is we took the list of schools, public schools in Massachusetts, from DESE's database. And then that was the distribution list that Bridgewater State used. So if somebody were mailing something to your school, that is where the boxes were sent. So hopefully find it. If you can't, let me know, and I can see if we can work with the folks at Bridgewater to find out where they went. So, so speaking of the project itself, we have a lot of really awesome partners on this project. So not only did we work with Bridgewater State, not only obviously Plymouth Public Schools, who I represent, and Plymouth 400, but I think the coolest part about this is we reached out to all of the local history stakeholders that have topics in this book, and asked for their input and their guidance on this. So, Pilgrim Hall, JFK Museum, Commonwealth Museum, Plymouth County Registry of Deeds, because we have the original deeds of the Plymouth colony there, which is pretty wild. Plymouth Plantation, now Plymouth Patuxent, the Freedom Trail Foundation. But I think most importantly, and most important to me personally, is we've worked in collaboration with the recognized tribes in Massachusetts, the Mashpee Wampanoag, the Wampanoag tribe of Gay Head, Herring Pond Wampanoag tribe, and Nipmuc Nation to work on this as well. And as you'll see in a video presentation in a moment, the book was co-written by Linda Coombs, who is a Wampanoag educator that we work with here in Plymouth 400. So a really important part of this project, I think, is that this is a resource that was intentionally developed to make sure that the Native perspective on the history of Massachusetts is not only just present and balanced within the colonial and the settler colonial narrative, but also present all the way through the timeline and all the way through this story of Massachusetts, which is really cool. So that being said, why don't I turn it over to some video from some people who are just absolutely amazing and made this resource happen. So 3 people you're going to hear from in the next couple of minutes are Chris Lloyd, Mark Skipworth, and Linda Coombs. So Chris Lloyd is the publisher of What on Earth books. He's British, as you'll notice. And we got connected to him through Plymouth 400 probably about 2 years ago. And he started this project. He writes books that spark curiosity and a curious desire to learn knowledge for students. And so he has started this series of writing these books about the history of states. So he had done Illinois first for their 150th, Texas, history of Texas, and now we're the 3rd state to do this in the series. So that's how this whole project started. We've been working with Chris from the beginning. It's the idea of a timeline, the idea of the news articles is all from him. He used to be, he's used to write for a newspaper and be a journalist in the UK before he became an author. So that's where that format comes from. So we worked with Chris, and Chris then brought in Mark Skipworth, who is a writer that he works with in the UK, to be a lead writer on this book. And then Linda Coombs joined the team as well. And Mark and Linda worked together to write the book itself. So you're going to hear from Chris and then Mark and Linda. And I think that this video does a really good job explaining, what is the purpose of this project and what are our aims and what are we trying to provide for you as educators. So hopefully I've clicked the right things to get some audio here. If you don't hear any audio, somebody throw that in the chat and I'll try to troubleshoot it. So this is one of my many Zoom nightmares, and hopefully we're going to avoid it.
Lloyd.
Thank you very much indeed, Michelle. And yes, I'm joining you all from the sunny UK, a few thousand miles away. And I would have been there in person, I promise, if you'd let me come in. But, the world is a crazy place at the moment. And I have to say, it almost brings a tear to my eye, actually, that we managed to do this. and we've got all these wonderful people together. I'm sorry I can't shake the hands and wave to all of those folks who are listening in and viewing this, but I want to thank you all for your support. I have to say, this has been the most enriching and rewarding project that I've ever been involved with. And I've been involved in a lot of partnerships now in the history of publishing in our little company, which began really, I began as a storyteller and a writer myself, as a journalist on the Sunday Times, and eventually through having my own children realized that the thing that drives us all and makes us all feel good about ourselves is being able to use our own natural curiosity about the world we live in. And I'm desperately passionate to make the point in schools and literary festivals or wherever I get the chance that for many of us, if not most of us, the real world is more amazing than anything you can make up. And there are so many incredible stories around us. And really, that's why I founded this company, to try and bring that idea of natural curiosity to the heart of education and developing a lifelong love of learning. Because if we all love learning, then we can adapt. It doesn't matter how crazy the world is, and if we lose our job and how desperate, things may be. If you love learning, then you can adapt. And that's the story of humanity. That's the story of our species, whether it goes back to the ice ages and everything got very cold, so we learned how to make fire. That was cool. That was pretty neat. And that same spirit, I think, drives us today. And here we are adapting. We're having our launch. We've sent out the books. We're having this great event here on Zoom. So maybe what I should do very quickly is just show you a tiny little bit of what this is about. You've heard a lot about the Massachusetts Chronicles. It's a book, and it is, but it's more than a book. But there is a book, and here it is. And this is what's been sent out to all the schools in the state, 32 copies to every school. And it's a conventional book, but it's a book with a little bit of a difference in that all the stories, the key stories really going from before there was any European contact in what is now Massachusetts. So when the indigenous people, how they lived their lives, that's how we begin the story, and more about that in a minute. All of these are newspaper articles. They're written, as Congressman Keating said, as if the events happened the day before. So you will see there are bylines in here from all our correspondence. And this, to me, seems a very intuitive way for children to learn about history, because it allows the drama and the excitement and the emotion and the jeopardy and the what happens next of real life to come into the stories of the past. And so often those things are lost, when we think of history as if it's in a textbook. So this isn't a textbook, even though it's gone into the schools. It's a living storytelling rendition of incredible moments, highs and lows, all the way through 400 plus years in the story of the state. So there are about 60 of these articles. And then the second part of the book is something that I've been passionate about ever since I started writing books and publishing them, is a timeline. And this timeline is divided into different topics, which I'm hoping you can see across there, different topics of commerce and conflict and culture and politics and science and so on. So this is cross-curricular. It's not just social studies. It's about every aspect of life. It's about the real world. If you think about it, our brains are not divided into different subjects. There's not a bit of history and geography and art and science and maths and, that's not the real world. Our brains are connected and they love to make connections. And when we make a new connection, we see the world in a slightly different way. And that's why I called our company What on Earth Books. What on earth is that? And if we can create that sense of curiosity and create environments where children can make connections, then I really believe we're on the path towards a lifelong love of learning. So here are 100 moments across the curriculum of key moments in the history of the state. Of course, there are things we should have included that we didn't. There are so many things we couldn't include that we wanted, but it goes all the way up to the present day to give that sense of context and curiosity to the whole incredible story of Massachusetts. There's a map, there are different places to visit. There's an honor roll of key people involved in state history. And then there are partners. So I'm just going to flag that up there, a terrific array of amazing partners who we've worked with to make this happen. And I cannot emphasize how grateful I am and what a pleasure it has been to work with them. In addition to that, the schools have also got a giant version of the timeline, and this is where I'm going to make a bit of a fool of myself as I try and show this to you, but it's a laminated version of the timeline that unfolds and can be spread out and put on a school wall or in a reception area. It goes on, it's 12 feet long, which is why it's a little unmanageable. in a Zoom call, but hopefully you get the idea that this can be something that isn't just put on a shelf, it's something to be put on a wall. It can be a real beacon of curiosity for parents as well as teachers, as well as students over a long period of time. And then the final piece before I hand over to the very important authors is that on the timeline, we've included a number of these QR codes, which you can see here, which allows anybody to scan the code and then they can go to a playlist of videos. And we're encouraging students and teachers to put up their own interpretations of the key moments on the timeline as little video clips, so that this can be a lasting legacy of not history just told as it was as a snapshot in 2020 at Plymouth 400, but told through the lens of pupils in years to come, as they can see the interpretations of key moments in the state's stories over time. So I have to just say, if I may, just in conclusion, that my own personal life has been tremendously enriched. And all the people that have been mentioned so far, you know, from Vinny and Michelle and Gary and Fred and Paul and Rob and Joe, and of course to Bruce and Patricia Bartlett, to my chairman, Sir Robert Worcester, who continues to be a great inspiration and mentor, who was also fortunate enough to come to our inaugural meeting at Bridgewater State University, which I remember with terrific fondness. I have a great debt of thanks to him. I guess as I hand over here, I want to thank Mark Skipworth, who I have partnered with over many projects. He's in Illinois and Texas and other states where we've tried to do something similar. And I met him when I was at the Sunday Times 20, 30 years ago. He has a wonderful technique for storytelling. And we wrote much of this book before I had the opportunity to be introduced to the second author, Linda Coombs. And when we went through the draft manuscript with Linda Coombs, that wasn't an easy conversation, may I say, because Linda absolutely rightly pointed out many of the prejudices that I think we all have that are unintended, and certainly unintended in my case, but nevertheless, it's very difficult to see your own prejudices. And I think Linda's involvement has been fundamental to this project. I have had tremendous fun with her going through rewriting this book, understanding myself the full necessity to think of state history in a different way, and to see that diversity and to respect these incredible people who've been here for thousands of years and their contribution that they can make today and into the future. And I very much hope this project is something that can really hammer that point home for generations to come. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Mark, who's going to speak to you via video, and then we'll hear from the wonderful Linda Coombs about her interpretation and her participation in this project. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Mark Skipworth and I'm the co-author of the Massachusetts Chronicles. I'm delighted to be delivering this message at the Chronicles book launch. Thank you for attending this virtual event in difficult times. The Massachusetts Chronicles is the third book in a series of US state histories that reveal the remarkable people and events that have helped to shape these amazing places. I've been lucky enough to have authored the 3 of them, though I expect I'll need to hand over the baton if all 50 of the US states are to be covered to complete the series. Having said that, the story of Massachusetts is the story of America. Its history includes not only indigenous peoples, pilgrims and presidents, but also pioneers of industry, leaders of anti-slavery and the women's rights movements. It played a key role in the American Revolution and has been and remains a cultural, educational and sporting powerhouse. The Massachusetts Chronicles has been a fascinating project to undertake. As you can probably guess from my accent, I'm an Englishman who grew up in the east of the country, not so far from the original homes of many of the pilgrims. As a result, I feel I've been able to bring a fresh perspective on the state's history, but I leave it to you to judge. Here's a little about my own story. I studied modern history at Oxford University, the word modern being applied at Oxford to historical events after the fall of Rome. I was a senior newspaper editor at the Sunday Times in London, an executive editor and deputy editor at the Daily Telegraph and Sunday Telegraph. As a reporter, I won a number of awards for campaigns and investigations. I've spent a good deal of time in the US as a journalist, and it's great to be able to marry my passion for history with my affection for America. I'm proud of the Chronicles and their newspaper style format, a style which will surprise no one to learn is very familiar to me. The articles have a lively immediacy that I hope you'll find both entertaining and informative. The idea is that they've been written as if the events have just happened, which students of my previous state histories have found particularly engaging. The 100-moment timeline is all about context and is cross-curricular, interweaving politics, science, culture, commerce, conflict and sport. It's a rich experience that I hope will be shared by people of all ages. On a personal note, where do I wish I had been an eyewitness during these momentous times? I think my visit to Concord was the moment when I was inspired by the Massachusetts story. Standing on the North Bridge, I was transported back to 1775, when the Patriots battled the British Redcoats and gained the upper hand. They were among the first shots fired in the Revolutionary War that ultimately led to American independence. I'll console myself with the old saying that it's not the winning that counts, it's the taking part. Throughout the life of the project, I've received invaluable expert guidance and support from many people across the state, all of whom are just as passionate about this history as I am. In particular, I'd like to thank Linda Combs, my co-author, for the very special perspective she has brought to the Chronicles. Thank you for listening. I hope the Chronicles newspaper articles and timeline help you to inspire a new generation of Bay Staters to understand their shared past. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Linda Coombs. I'm a member of the Aquinnah Wampanoag tribe of Martha's Vineyard. My background has been in museum work, and I started out at the Boston Children's Museum in 1974, where I worked for 11 years. I spent 30 years in the Wampanoag Indigenous program at Plymouth Plantation, and 9 years at the Aquinnah Cultural Center in my own community in Aquinnah on Martha's Vineyard. Over that time, I've gained a great awareness of how history has been written, how it's been taught, and how it's been represented. Indigenous people, and history and culture, have largely been left out or have been completely misrepresented in the telling of the history. The myths, misinformation, stereotypes, misconceptions still are being brought forward and taught. The Massachusetts Chronicles have made a huge effort to include Indigenous voice and Indigenous perspective. This is not revisionist. It is adding in that which has been left out. Indigenous people, history, culture are everywhere and just need to be realized. This will bring a fuller and more comprehensive, more truthful and accurate portrayal of Indigenous people and history. This text is a good start in that inclusivity. It is a model for the way that history should be told. It is a wonderful first step that illustrates the direction that the representation and history should go. Thank you.
All right, so got to hear from Chris about how the project more broadly was created, and then from Mark and Linda about their roles as co-authors. And I just want to echo the sentiments from Linda. I worked with Linda on the Educator guide as well, and it really raised a lot of blind spots to me. I like to think that I'm increasingly trying to become a more culturally responsive educator. And it was a really telling first meeting when we looked at a preliminary draft that I'd written. And we found so many places where there were blind spots and tellings that needed to be retold, even from the educator perspective. So the thing that I'm probably most excited about with this project is that we've done a lot of work to make sure that it is an inclusive telling of the history of Massachusetts. I think the two things that really pop up about the Massachusetts Chronicles is, one, a lot of our Massachusetts history resources, especially for students, kind of drop off after the Revolutionary era. So this book and the timeline bring that story all the way through today. So if you're using it, for example, in a US 1 or US 2 class, at the high school level, you can make connections to World War I, World War II, 20th century topics that are more broadly in the standards of the state frameworks, but have a Massachusetts connection in the book. And second, it really highlights the diverse viewpoints and the diverse perspectives that come out, have not necessarily traditionally come out in Massachusetts history resources. So I've just taken a snapshot of series of articles within the book that feature and center the voices of Indigenous people. The first article in the book itself is about New Year preparations for the Wampanoag people, and then an article about the kidnapping of Squanto and other natives by English settlers who brought them back to Europe, as we know that story, but it's coming from that perspective of the sachems who meet to try to discuss what's going on. I love the one in the upper right here. The mystery ship arrives, and this time it looks like they mean to stay. How many times have we taught about the arrival of the Mayflower in Plymouth, and we've taught about it exclusively through the perspective of the Pilgrims, right? Which is an important perspective, and that is in our state frameworks. But coming to this article through the perspective of the Indigenous people that live in the area, I think is a really unique approach compared to other resources. Paul Cuffey, if you don't know that story, awesome story of a very wealthy ship owner in the area that is now Dartmouth, New Bedford. And he was part Indigenous and part Black. And that is a story, that is a cultural perspective that we don't see very often in these resources. And then the story continues all the way through the 19th and 20th centuries as well. So you'll see here the Mashpee Revolt is represented, and Frank James, who gave a protest speech in Plymouth for the 350th anniversary, which launched the National Day of Mourning movement. So the Indigenous perspective is really strong here, and it's co-equal to the settler colonial narrative that we're traditionally seeing, and that is very much thanks to the work of Linda Coombs. So I just want to highlight that because I think this is going to be very powerful as we look to enact that particular aspect of the state framework and try to teach this history in an inclusive way. So just very quickly, if you've had a chance to look at the book, great. If not, these are the things that I would encourage you to check out when you do get the in your hands. So the timeline, in addition to those articles, is probably the coolest thing to me. I was one of those kids, I loved just ripping through an atlas as a kid and learning so much about countries just through maps. So we hope that that kind of curiosity is sparked in a timeline as well. So the timeline is cool, and I'll just point out down here at the bottom, because it's got 6 different contextual lenses that are used across the whole timeline. So commerce, conflict, culture, politics, science, and sport, and they're color coded. So you'll see as you go through the timeline that each of the events has a particular context that it is related to, and it's outlined in that particular color. There's so much on this timeline. Like, a kid could really just probably spend a couple hours diving into this. And what's neat about it is being a timeline, right? There's chronological order and chronological reasoning, but it's also compelling in a way that you could flip to any of the pages on this timeline or any of the panels on the big fold out timeline, start there and just really have at it. So it's a very accessible resource to look at all of these different events in Massachusetts history. So I have just 2 pages here as a snapshot. So you'll see that the entries on the timeline are organized and color coded by the context. You have the decades here to mark where we are in the chronology of that. And then, as Chris had mentioned in his introduction, there are these QR codes along the way. And what we'll look at when we look at the Educator Guide in a minute is we've put together a project that you can do with your students where they can record a 1 to 2 minute video telling about either an event on the timeline or an event of local significance in their own community. upload that through our website, and then those will get put on these playlists, so that if you scan that with QR code with your phone, it'll take you to that playlist and the student videos will be there. So in addition to this static resource, we hope that the video project becomes this ongoing resource, and it's student driven and student centered. So in addition to the timeline, we have, like I said, some almanac features, which I think are particularly fabulous for our third grade curriculum, right, about the Massachusetts geography in Massachusetts today. So we have a list of key places to visit. We have a map of Massachusetts here. We have facts about Massachusetts. There's also a page, the historical flags of Massachusetts, a basic overview of the government of Massachusetts, and then a couple pages of a Massachusetts honor roll of key people in Massachusetts history all the way up to today. So this is filled to the brim with information, but the question then becomes, well, how do I teach this? What do I do with it? And that is the part that I've played in this project that I'm really excited about, not only to present to you, but to get your feedback and have an ongoing dialogue about it. So in addition to the book is this educator's guide that we developed that has a series of activities and performance tasks that you can do in your classroom. And we broke that down into two different ways. One is that there are 7 themes that we've identified. So the themes are based on the National Council for the Social Studies themes, 10 themes for teaching social studies. So theme 1 is behold the timeline. It's chronological reasoning. So there are ways that you can use chronological reasoning as the launching point for the activity. Theme 2 is becoming Massachusetts. So looking at it through a culture and social institutions lens. Theme 3, community civic action in the Commonwealth. I'm really excited about this, especially in the context of our practice standards now in the state framework and the 8th grade civics course. But looking at agency and looking at rights in Massachusetts history, that's what this theme focuses on. I'm a huge James Taylor fan. I hope I won't get sued by him, but I couldn't help myself with the geography theme, calling it From Stockbridge to Boston, if anybody knows that reference. And we're looking at Massachusetts through geography and place. Industry and innovation, pretty straightforward there. Economics, technology, human environmental interaction. Big time Bay Staters. So we did want to create a section where we can look at kind of that biography approach and individuals in history in that theme in particular. Again, a great resource for the grade 3 curriculum in particular. And then the last theme is Our Commonwealth Today and Tomorrow. And that's the only theme you'll see in the Educator Guide that's not organized by either K-5 or 612. That's K-12, because we wanted that to not only be about having students ponder their place in Massachusetts today, but do so in a really holistic way. So we're hoping that the activities in that last theme are something that you could adapt across the whole spectrum. And I think that's really true of all of the activities, now I think of it, because you are masters of differentiation as educators. But that was the approach there in theme 7 when you see that in the guide itself. So the guide looks something like this, and I'm actually going to share that link again in the chat. On the website that Bridgewater has created, there is actually, we'll look at it together in a second, but there's a PDF copy of the Educator Guide if you're one of those who likes to peruse along. In real life, I would have handed you one, right, if we were up in Malden at the conference center. So that is available at the website that Bridgewater created if that's something you do want to take a look at while we go through this. But I'm just highlighting a few things, and then I'm going to switch over to that anyways. There we go. But each of the themes, it looks like this. So you have a little bit of an overview from myself and Linda about what this theme is about and from our perspective. And this is also derived from the work. I put together a team of 10 awesome educators from across the grade spans here in Plymouth to vision out these themes. And then after the intro, you'll have guiding questions. You could call them compelling questions, essential questions. We went with guiding questions to be consistent with the language in the state frameworks, but there's just a few here as a conversation starter. So for this chronological reasoning section, for example, what had to happen for Massachusetts to form? We're trying to think about, like, in the chronological sense, what is Massachusetts? Because this book, remember, starts before this place was named Massachusetts. How has Massachusetts changed over time, and which moments have impacted your life, your family, your future? And then you'll see the series of suggested activities. These are not full-blown lessons, and I'll actually get to that at the end about how you can help us with that. But what these are just kind of like brief explanations of activities that you could use in your classroom, and use this as a like a starter kit to build out a lesson in your class. So we've organized them, as you can see, by K5, and then also 6-12 would be on the next page. And then under each of these activities, we have tagged what we believe are the relevant and applicable standards from the Massachusetts state framework. So this is very helpful too. If you're trying, you don't have time to do all of these activities, but you're trying to find very targeted activities that could help your students relative to the curriculum you're teaching, that is available there. And we use the tagging convention that's used in the state framework as well. And then what we also try to do is you'll see icons next to particular activities, and these icons represent the other subjects that you could connect this particular activity to, especially in the K5 setting, if you wanted to develop an interdisciplinary approach to teaching Massachusetts history. So the book means there's an ELA connection here. The paintbrush is arts, the calculator is math, and not featured on this particular page is a microscope for science. So we want to encourage you to be thinking not only about social studies, where this is really situated, but also where else can you make connections to the other frameworks here in Massachusetts. So there are, like I said, these 7 themes across the entire book. And I just wanted to highlight how I see these themes connecting to the state framework. So if you've had a chance to really unpack that state framework, there's a series of guiding principles at the beginning. And guiding principle 2, in my opinion, is the most powerful guiding principle relative to what we were teaching in the previous standards, which says that an effective history and social science education incorporates diverse perspectives and acknowledges that perceptions of events are affected by race, ethnicity, culture, religion, education, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, and personal experience. Not only do I think that this is an important upgrade, if you will, from the previous framework, but I think this is important and timely because I don't know about you, but I've been engaging with some folks in the community and in the larger sphere beyond the bubble of our classroom about what it means to actually teach history and teach perspective taking. And sometimes that means bringing in diverse perspectives challenges a traditional narrative. So what I did is I just took a few of the activities that are featured in the Educator guide from 3 different units to show where we think that you can actually live out that guiding principle through these activities related to the Massachusetts Chronicles. So in the first one, for example, students would use that article about Paul Cuffey on page 16 in the book as a launching point to research the history of abolition in the whaling industry and the contribution of both free Blacks and runaway slaves in that industry. So there's this wild, amazing, compelling story about how the whaling industry, which was led by Shakers who were abolitionists in nature, there were skilled tradesmen that were Black that were working in this industry. Paul Cuffey himself was a ship owner, very successful, wealthy businessman. And runaway slaves would actually get into this industry as part of a way to get to their freedom, because it gave them not only employment and skills, but it gave them a place to hide when they got on a ship for 2 years when their slave catchers were hired to come up here and find them. And it actually intersects with the story of Frederick Douglass. I did a awesome NEH landmark seminar on this years ago. Well, here's an opportunity to tell the story of the whaling industry, but through that lens of this perspective of these people who were enslaved and are running away and seeking their freedom, right? We're looking in the community civic action in the Commonwealth unit on Native peoples and the struggle for land. So using the Mashpee Revolt of 1833 as a launching point to explore how that story of a struggle for land and land recognition has continued on over time. And then 50 years later, so Wamsutta Frank James, who I've mentioned throughout this webinar, there's an article about him on page 28 of the book, where he is asked by the organizers of the 350th anniversary of the arrival of the Pilgrims to give a speech about that history. And the speech that he submits to them is highly critical of the narrative and of the history and of the way that it was being celebrated. So they ask to censor that speech. He refuses to allow that to happen. And he actually organizes a protest on top of Coles Hill in Plymouth, where he delivers that speech. And that becomes the beginning of this movement called the National Day of Mourning, which forces us to look at this totally different perspective on the arrival of the Pilgrims and the impact that arrival had on Indigenous people, both locally and in North America. So here are just 3 examples of how each of these tasks, they may not seem terribly complex in the way that they're presented in the Educator Guide, because we want to give you that flexibility. But I see them as connecting to that guiding principle, which is something that I know that educators are trying, myself included, to do better by in this new standards and new framework. So we will take a look in a moment at this particular article, but I'm actually going to exit out of the presentation briefly. So, and I'm going to go to that link that I've put in the chat, because I want to make sure that you get to see what I think is probably a super valuable resource right now in this hybrid remote situation that we have, which is this awesome website that Bridgewater State University has created. So if maybe Jay, Kathy, if you give me a thumbs up that you can see the website, if hopefully it should say, okay, great. So on the screen is this website. So it's bridgew.edu/masschronicles. So in addition to supporting the distribution of the book itself and connecting us with Bruce and Patricia Bartlett, who are donating all these books to the schools, Bridgewater State put together an awesome website for the book as well. So when you go to that website, you'll see a few things. There's a link to just an explanation of the project, which you just received here through the video, a link where you can purchase additional books and timelines, a letter that went out to all the schools via the Superintendent's Association. But down here on the website are a couple things. First, the historical timeline events have been recreated on an interactive timeline here on the website. So one of the things that's going to be a challenge, obviously, is teaching in the pandemic, having a class set and having to disinfect them or leave them for a while. Like, it's going to be tricky to do that. So this is a digital version of the timeline that you and your students could use on the Bridgewater website that has all of the 100 events and the QR codes for those video links that we're hopefully going to populate with student work, all here on this timeline on the website. If there's an article that relates to a particular event, you can click on the link and it will actually bring you to an accessible PDF version of the article from the book. So this is a great way to explore the resource and use the content of the timeline and the newspaper articles with your students in a digital format, given that we are trying to kind of reinvent education here on the fly this year with the pandemic. So that is something you should definitely check out on the website. And then the other place I'd like to point you are the newspaper articles. So while we don't have a full PDF version of the book on the website, we do have each of the articles as its own separate PDF. And the reason we did that way is twofold. One, they've put a search feature here where you can filter by headline or keyword. In the headline, you can filter by century and you can filter by theme on the timeline. But two, when you open up these articles, you'll notice that even though they're kind of separate from the rest of the book, they are accessible. So if you have accessibility needs for your students, these are accessible PDFs, which is good. So all of the articles are linked to your question, Elaine, on that timeline page to the relevant event on the timeline, which is really cool. So that's one way you could get at the articles. And then the other way is through this page on the website, which has all the articles listed, and you can filter or just go chronologically here. So the content of the book itself, the articles and the timeline entries are all available digitally through the Bridgewater website. And honestly, this is a website we were developing before the pandemic broke out. And now I feel super appreciative of the work that those folks have done, given the situation that we're all in this year. And then the Educator's Guide is down here. That is available in a full PDF version. So when you click on that, you will get the Educator Guide, which is the exact version of the hard copy that you got in your class. And that's here as well. So you can skim your way through here and access that digitally. I know that I've become increasingly a digital person because I'm not even good, even at 36 years old, of remembering to bring things home from school. Was bad as a student, no better as an adult. So I appreciate having a digital copy here that I can download and check out. So that's available. And then on the website, similar to the articles, you can actually sort by keyword or standard. You can sort by grade level if it's tagged K5, 6, 12, and like I said, the last theme is K12. And then you can also sort by an interdisciplinary subject, ELA, art, math, and science, technology, and engineering. So that is available here. And this might be easier if you're developing a lesson plan and from a copy paste perspective as well. So all of the content from both the timeline and articles from the book and then also the educator guide are available here on the Bridgewater State website, and they'll continue to be available. And then the last thing I'll note on the website, and then we'll just talk briefly about how you can adapt this to remote, and then I'll open up to any last questions, is the student video project. So this is on the last page of the educator guide, and there's also a website for it here. But we're encouraging you to have your students become part of this process. So what we want them to do is pick something from the timeline, pick a news article. Maybe it's an event we missed in your small community that's important to the history of Massachusetts, and have them develop a video of that actual activity. And what I've done is I've developed a learning plan for if you wanted to execute this as a performance task in your classroom. So there are some guiding questions that you can use to scaffold the student research. There are directions on how to approach the recording itself and some pro tips we got from our friends at Plymouth Educational Television. And then also some reflection questions that you can use to make sure that students are not only producing a video, but thinking more broadly about A, how the topic is important and significant in Massachusetts history, and B, how learning about that topic and engaging in this project has given them a new perspective, hopefully, and on the way they think about the history of their community and of their state. Then what you can do is you can actually upload those videos to the Bridgewater website, and Bridgewater will curate moving these over to those QR code playlists. So what'll happen is in a short while after submission, your students' work will actually become part of this resource moving forward. So you'll be able to scan that QR code for the applicable decade or century rather. Up will come this playlist, and your students' product will be part of that playlist. So we're really excited about that, but we also need entries. So please, please, please consider using this as a project-based learning experience for you and your students, especially if you're looking at a hybrid model. This might be a good way to have them do independent research on those at-home days, talk through that research and process that in class, have them shoot the video at the at-home days, right? So this is something that you could hopefully adapt to hybrid and remote settings. So there's a lot on this Bridgewater State website. But like I said, I was thinking recently about, how could we use this resource in a hybrid or remote setting? And something I did was I put together, we don't have time to kind of model this and work through it together, but there's a link here in the slide, slide 14 on the slide deck, to a Jamboard. I don't know if anybody else has recently come to discover Jamboards from Google. But I put together a Jamboard here. And what I did is I took a screenshot of the PDF. So by doing that, it's not accessible. But the purpose of this is maybe if you needed the accessible version, student could use the accessible version first. And then as a class, or you could do this in breakouts, you could do this whole class. But as a class, you could leverage the features of Jamboard, such as sticky notes. This is an important topic in maths history, to populate the Jamboard with their thoughts. And you could do, like your close reading strategies. You could highlight using the highlight feature here on the Jamboard. We could highlight what they think are the main ideas of the article like this. We could populate it with summary ideas and stickies, questions that come from this. I think what you'll see in the educator guide is a lot of what we try to do is basically say, here's a good starting point to then go do independent research and dive deeper on the topic. So what questions do students generate as they read this article? They could populate the Jamboard with stickies of those questions, then use those questions for further research. So this is just one way, for example, we could take this digital resource and use it in a remote hybrid setting, because I would hate to think that we have the launch of this great book. We have a resource we've never had in schools before, especially for that inclusive view of Massachusetts, and then can't use the books because of the pandemic. I think we can get creative around how we leverage the content, especially from the website that Bridgewater's created for us for remote and hybrid settings. And then the last thing I just want to point out, and I'll open up to questions because I want to be mindful of our time here with the keynotes coming up, is that Bridgewater has put together a professional learning opportunity for teachers as well. So they have on that website developed what's called a micro credential, where you spend a significant amount of time taking a deeper dive as an educator, applying this content to your classroom and then reflecting on that. And if you go through that process, you can actually earn PDPs and a digital badge from Bridgewater State for doing so. So the digital badge for this one is the Massachusetts Chronicles. You basically register on the website, you complete a brief contextual reflection. How do you currently teach Massachusetts history? What do you like about that? What would you like to get better at? You take a dive into the resource, develop and execute a lesson using one of the tasks from the Educator guide, and then submit a reflection and some evidence of student work. And when you do that, Bridgewater will award you 10 PDPs for that work and this digital badge as well. And I just want to note too, you'll see on the website, this is a project they started last year where you can also earn some micro-credentials on other issues in civic education. So there's a lot here. There's the book, the Educator guide, the website that has all the content, and then also a professional development opportunity from Bridgewater. But hopefully this crash course overview has given you an opportunity to think about how this can be used in your classroom setting. So you can throw questions in the chat. I see a few here. Developing PD around mass history and providing teachers with these stories and some sort of primary sources. Brian, yes, I think our first goal here was to just get it out of the nest, get teachers familiar with it. But what I would love to see is working down the road with the partners that develop the content and taking those primary sources that are the source material for the articles and building out even further for professional development. So this is kind of like an anchor to more state and local PD. So hopefully I can work with Ruben, we can work with the historical partners in MCSS to keep going. And to content PDP, that's a good point. Bridgewater's also talked about maybe having some sort of convening, might be virtual this year or otherwise, of folks who complete the micro-credential to actually share out the lessons and the experience for other educators. So finding the shipments of the book, you should check in, Elaine, with each school because they were sent to each school individually, but they were sent in a standard way. So hopefully that one email to the right person in the main office should be applicable across. But yeah, every single school, public school in Massachusetts, K through 12, so middle school, intermediate, elementary, and high school received a class set to start at the end of the summer. So like I said, I know it's a ton. Any other questions today? You can also unmute and ask. That's cool too. One of those facilitators.
Rob, this was wonderful. I'm so proud of Plymouth and you and all the work that you guys have done. This is just awesome.
Thank you. It's like I said, it was just like, you and Kathy can relate, so you get pulled into meetings in Plymouth with all the cool history stuff. And I got pulled into a meeting with a British guy and I didn't really know what it was about. And 2 years later, we've got all this. So it's pretty cool. So I've put, it's in the slide deck and you have access to that through the email, but the website link is there. If you do want to purchase additional books and class sets through this school year, Chris's publishing company is offering them at a deep discount. I plan to add a few more to each school's repertoire myself in Plymouth. So I will also say, by the way, that I don't make any money off of this. This is part of the cool day job I have, but that's available there. And then the micro-credential website is also linked there. My contact info is in the corner. Please reach out, keep in touch. I'd love to talk more deeply about how you're using it in your schools or work through that planning process with you, as I'm starting to do with our educators here in Plymouth. But I'm excited, not just that we've got it out there, but this is the beginning of hopefully something that we can use across the state to really approach state history in a way that's purposeful and inclusive and rigorous. So awesome. I think Gorman also put a link to the feedback survey. If you could fill that out, that would be super helpful for us here with the conference. And have a wonderful, if you go back to bed, I don't know if it's too late, whatever you do, have a great Sunday. And keep in touch.
Thanks, Rob.
Bye, everybody.